to admit that over these last several years, I have interviewed a tremendous amount of people. And what's so great is that every guest that I've had, they have left a lasting impression on me. I cannot contain my excitement enough. And I say that with all due respect for this guest that I have today, because she is such a powerhouse, phenomenal human being, changing the trajectory and the course of the world through the work she is doing. And that is none other than the Zolal Habibi, who is, she'll tell you about herself. I can't begin to describe it, but Zolal, welcome to the Power Transformation Podcast. I am honored to have you here today.
It's actually a pleasure to be with you, and thank you for that very kind and humbling introduction. I don't know if I deserve all of that credit, but it's a pleasure to be with you, and please allow me to greet those who are tuning into the podcast today.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. And yes, I say that for this platform and for the work that you're doing, you are deserving of it, because what you are doing takes a level of courage, bravery, and compassion that is refreshing to see in our world today and in the landscape. But before we get into that, I always like to start with a nice, lighthearted icebreaker question, because this podcast focuses a lot on the who behind the what. And we will, of course, talk about the what. But let's just start with something lighthearted and have a nice, fun icebreaker question. So, my question for you is this. You do so much work, and you're traveling and you're speaking and you're doing so much globally to make your mission known. But say that you have a day when you have a little downtime and you can just rest and relax. What is it that you like to do in those moments?
Well, it's been a while, I guess, for having that, but I think just to be able to be with friends and family, surrounded by loved ones, and to be able to just you know, be able to have just normal conversations with them and just be, together. I think wherever we are, as long as we're with our loved ones and friends and surrounded by those that we care about, that's like the best way to be able to to spend your time.
Mhm.
So that would be it, I guess.
Yes, see, and I'm glad that you answered that and that you prefaced it and saying it's been a while, because for a lot of people, that is a rare moment in this day and age. But you are definitely always on the move, always on the go, and you have devoted your life to service in so many ways. And before we talk about that, this is a question that if a person were to ask you this, how would you respond? Who is Zola Habibi?
Well, I guess I am just a normal person like everyone else. Just I guess I have come to different crossroads in my life and have just taken maybe some of the paths less traveled. I was introduced to the human rights situation in Iran very early on, so that shaped who I was, and it also gave me a sense of purpose to be able to understand, I guess, from very early on that um, all the not everything that we have is something that's granted to everyone. I mean,
Mm,
there's so much that we take for granted on daily basis. And I learned that, these are privileges that we need to safeguard and we need to protect, and we have to also fight for them so others can have those same liberties and those same, as I said, it's like oxygen. So you don't
yeah.
feel it. And unfortunately, it's uh, something that we take for granted. But the minute
Mhm.
that you don't have it, you're going to suffocate. So it's the same thing with freedom. And so I guess I have I've dedicated my entire adult life to the
Mhm.
cause of freedom in Iran. I joined the resistance, you know, the summer after, or actually like the fall after my graduation from high school. So since
Wow.
September 99 till now,
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
have been a member of this movement. Yeah.
Wow. I absolutely love that. And I never asked you your approximate age, but I feel even closer to you because 1999 was by far the best year to graduate high school. So, yes, I am so excited.
Well, we
Yes,
have more
yes,
in
yes.
common than you think then, right?
Yes, girl. I'm just sitting here like, I know she has a serious cause, but I was like, oh my goodness, she's part of my class. So that is, we are still young enough to do everything. And I'm telling you, for people that are listening to this, she looks very young. And so I'm sitting here like, yes, girl, yes, excellent genes. But seriously, though, the work the work that you are doing is fabulous. I just had to say that we are trailblazers in our age group. And you did somewhat explain it, but if you could just briefly bring a bit not even clarity, but if a person were to ask you specifically, what do you do? You touched on it in who you are, but in a minute or less, and then we'll go deeper. Just share with us if a person were to ask you, what do you do professionally or even just for your life's work and mission, how would you answer them?
Well, as I mentioned, I have dedicated my life to the cause of freedom in Iran. In different years, that has looked differently depending on like what is that burning point that needs attention. But it has been to promote human rights and freedom in Iran, and to also be able to present the democratic alternative that exists, to try to be able to echo the voice of, the people of Iran who are unfortunately denied that access
Mhm.
to the international community, and to be able to, um, you know, uh, be able to raise awareness, be able to get governments or lawmakers to support the people of Iran, and to put pressure on the Iranian regime, and to push forward for a democratic change in Iran, the overthrow of this regime in its entirety, and to promote a secular democratic republic in Iran.
Now, let's go back because we know that, from what we hear here in the US, and I know that you travel and also live abroad as well, but also with your home base being here in the US, you know how sometimes in the United States media can be a bit limiting or not share everything or show everything. And before we get more into what exactly is happening in Iran, let's go back some. Is what were some of those formative years in your life that even caused you or sparked you to begin having these types of ideas to say, hey, perhaps one day I will do more to commit my life to this? What is that story?
Well, I belong to a generation that has unfortunately never had the possibility to actually visit Iran. So I was born and raised in the US, in the DC area. My parents came to the US before the revolution as students, but they were activists from like early on. And to the extent that I was probably like 3 days old the first time they took me to a demonstration. So,
Mm.
um, but to give you a bit of context of how much of an activist that they were. But my father was a prominent writer and a human rights activist, and so I got introduced to the human rights situation in Iran very early on. I remember, I mean, as young as like 1, 2 years old. Like this is like the realities that I grew up with. But
Mhm.
I remember like the first time I met people who were victims of torture. I was 4 or 5 years old. There were a group of political prisoners who had just escaped Iran, and they had come to the U.S. to go and testify at the U.S. Congress, and also at the United Nations, about what they had experienced. And so we had the privilege of being their host. They were staying at our house for
Wow.
1 or 2 weeks, I guess, at that time. And I remember they became my real life superheroes,
Mm,
because I got to meet them firsthand. I got to be able to speak to them and learn from them what was actually going on in Iran.
hmm.
Um, and I remember like I kept on questioning them and pushing them to tell me their stories, and they're like, "She's too young. She shouldn't be hearing about this. She shouldn't even know that we're ex-political prisoners." And I was like, you know what? I've seen your pictures
Wow.
in picket lines and everything. So I know who you are. I know
Mhm.
like what has happened to you, because especially one of them was a man who there's back when I was a child, I had seen posters of him of how that severely he had been tortured, and especially like the sole of his feet and everything. So I was like, you are that guy. I know who you are. So
Wow.
you need to explain to me what happened to you. And so finally I was able to push him, and he told me like a rated G version
Hmm.
of his story that would be suitable for a 4-year-old. And
Hmm.
to me, they became like my heroes, in life, or like, and that was like how I got connected to the human rights situation in Iran. But I would always thought that that's in Iran and we're here. So,
Hmm.
even though like every opportunity that I got, I would talk, start talking to people. I'm like, oh, do you know what's happening to children in Iran today? And they're like, what are you talking about? You're 5 years old.
Yeah.
But
Wow. Wow.
things changed in summer of 1988 for me. That summer, the Iranian regime had 30,000 political prisoners executed in Iran. And
Wow.
that summer, the regime actually had my father killed. Um, and I remember when I
Mm.
like the first month, I didn't know. They just kept on telling me like my dad was traveling, and I was used to my dad traveling because of his work and because of the work that he did. So it
Mm.
was like normal to have him travel. But eventually, when I found out, it was it was a very difficult blow to a 7-year-old, especially
Mm.
because I was like daddy's little girl. Because my dad, since
Wow.
he was a writer, he was always at home mostly with us. And so I had like this very close relationship with my dad. And um, so that was very difficult for me. But when I realized that that summer, 30,000 people had been executed, it just put things into a different perspective for me, because I didn't see myself as a victim anymore. I saw myself as to be like one of the lucky ones, because I knew people who had lost both their parents. I
Mm.
knew people who had to watch their parents be tortured as a
Mm.
method of psychological torture on those parents.
Mm.
And like, for instance, I had a friend, she was 5 when she had been forced to watch her father be tortured, and her dad ended up dying under torture, and she would have these nightmares about it. During the day when you spoke to her, she was like, I have no recollections of my time
Wow.
in prison. But when she would sleep, you know, those memories would come to her, and she would like wake up with like this fever and just screaming. And we knew what was happening, but she was like, I don't have any memories of then. I don't know what happened then. I don't remember anything about my father. And so, I mean, I knew these people like this, so I was like, I'm still one of the lucky ones. I never had to live under those circumstances.
Hmm.
I never had to experience that, and I still felt like lucky to have my mom. And so I never, I guess, saw myself as a victim. I always saw myself as one of the lucky ones. So that brought on responsibility for me. Like
Wow.
even as a child, I was like, I remember when I heard that my father had been executed, I cried for like 3 hours.
I'm
And
sure. Yeah.
then, my brother was coming home from kindergarten, who was only 3. And so my mom was like, if he sees you crying, he's gonna know something's wrong. So I had to like control myself and just be,
Mm.
um, just be able to have everything under control when he comes in. So I remember talking to myself and telling myself, like, what issue is crying going to solve? None.
Mm, mm,
And there was a story that, we were told as children, like a bedtime story, and it was the story of the city without smiles. That there was like this tyrant who was ruling, and he didn't have a smile, so he would take people's smiles to try to put it on his own lips, but smiles are um, unique to each person. So none
mm.
of those smiles would match, but he was taking away those smiles. So he was taking away those lies, right? And I thought to myself, so crying is only going to make Khomeini happy. I'm not going to give into that. So not crying became like a form of resistance for me as a 7-year-old.
Oh,
And
wow.
I made that decision that day that I'm never going to give them that satisfaction of crying, because I know that my dad died for good cause. He died for the freedom of the people of Iran, and I take pride in that. And so like that became like my form of resistance as a 7-year-old. And
Mm.
I continued for like a decade.
Yeah.
Didn't cry, and despite having like very difficult circumstances that I came face to face with later on in
Hmm.
the years, but still I didn't cry because I was like, that was the promise that I had made to myself and to my
Mm.
dad. And so yeah, I
Yeah,
guess I was introduced step by step to this
exactly.
situation. And I guess the turning point for me was after we graduated from high school, I was on a completely different path. I had gotten a full scholarship. I was going to go and I was going to go and study optometry and whatnot. And that summer, July 99, student uprisings broke out in Iran. And this was the first time since 88 that we saw like a major uprising in Iran. And it was our generation that was coming, those student uprisings. And I remember, and it was also the first time this was being televised because it was the start of cable television and CNN and whatnot. And I remember seeing those scenes and thinking to myself, like, what are you doing here?
Mm.
Are you going to just be like a bystander and just watch from abroad, like people are being thrown off buildings and being killed at point blank? Or are you going to be one of those who actually does something for all of this, you know, bloodshed and persecution to end? And I remember like the year before I had read an article that said there were 20,000 Iranian doctors in the US at that time. Right now I think it's probably like triple or quadruple that amount.
Hmm.
And I remember thinking, are you going to become one of those 20,000, or are you going to do something for Iran to be freed so those 20,000 can actually go to Iran and actually do something for their people? Because even right now, Iran has the highest brain drain in the world. So just imagine if the people of Iran were able to actually work towards, prosperity in their own country. So yeah, that was a turning point for me, and that's when I decided to join the resistance instead of
My
pursuing
goodness.
my studies.
Exactly. And wow, thank you for giving us that big picture. I really appreciate that. There are certain guests who I take the lead of the guest, and I think that your story is so profound in the context of it in those early years. You needed to share all of that, and I'm really glad that you did. And one thing that you've given me to even think about, I never considered how not crying would be a form of resistance. It doesn't mean that you didn't miss your dad or that you weren't grieving, but to put it in that context and to have such emotional intelligence at that young age of 7, to really think about that, that's another level. And the fact that it was you, your brother did do, you have other siblings from that
I'm
time
one,
frame.
I'm one younger brother. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. So with you and your brother, with your mom even having to navigate now this life without her husband and raising 2 children, how were the conversations over the years with your mother about this activist spirit inside of you? Is that something that you think that she knew you were going to eventually do one day, or is this something that really you kept quietly within yourself and there was interest in it. But how were those conversations? How did you let your mom into that world of saying, Mom, this is what I want to commit my life to?
Well, this is the interesting part, or maybe the twist in the story. My mom, after my father was killed, my mom decided to join the resistance herself.
Oh,
And so
wow. I
my
didn't
mom,
realize that.
yeah, and at that time she was, as you said, I mean, you can imagine she was like 25 with two small
Hmm.
kids. And so we ended up going to Iraq at that time because that's where the Iranian resistance was. This is before the Gulf War, so the world was
Okay.
on good terms with Iraq.
Yes,
It was a
exactly.
completely different circumstances, and so we went there. And after 2 years, the Gulf War happened, and I mean, immediately my mom came to this crossroad. Like, what am I supposed to do? Am I going to continue this fight? Or am I going to, you know, take my children back to the US so they're safe and sound? What am I going to do? And so she decided to stay, but send me and my brother back to the US. So me and my brother were raised by my aunt. My
Oh,
mom decided to dedicate her life to, the resistance. And so, um, growing up in the US with my aunt, I think everyone eventually they knew like my connection is something that you can't um, you know I had this really, really strong bond with the resistance and this
mhm.
connection. And so I remember like my aunt starting to fear that I would follow in my parents' footsteps when I was 16. And so
Oh,
she was like, at that point, she was like, you know what? No more contact with the resistance. And I was like,
uh-huh.
why? But you support this resistance. Why not? And she was like, you know what? I remember one time we were sitting at the in our living room, and it was my cousin who was like a year and a half older than me. She was sitting and I was sitting with my aunt, and my aunt was like, this discussion came up, and she was like, you know what? I am willing to have all four of my children go and join the resistance, even though knowing the risk that they might get killed, but for you two not to join, me and my brother not to join. And
Wow.
my cousin was like, thanks, mom. You're willing to have us go and get killed, but for them to just not to go, that's it. And she was
Yeah.
like, because she really, she was she had a really close bond with her brother, my dad. And so she had,
Okay.
in a way, she felt like she had to protect us with everything she
Mhm.
has, not to lose us too. And so I think since then, everyone had, these thoughts that, at the end of the day, she may make this decision. But once they saw that I was, pursuing medicine and had gotten a full scholarship, everyone's like, okay, we could rest assured that she's going to follow this path and continue with her studies. So that was a issue, I guess. And
Hmm.
then, but it was very difficult for me. I think the most difficult part of my decision to join the resistance was two things. One was telling my aunt that I've made this decision. it I think I dragged my feet on this for like a few months because I was like,
Hmm.
I don't have the heart to tell her that
Exactly.
I want to, I'm gonna go. And because I also knew how attached she was to me. I mean, uh and that was very difficult for me. And I think at the end of the day, I could never tell her to her face. So what I ended up doing is I
Mhm.
wrote her an eight-page letter by hand back then, right?
Oh my
And
goodness.
explaining why I have made this decision. And and then I remember leaving it on her bed like in the middle of the night, and just then I went out with my cousin, so I
Hmm.
wouldn't be home when she reads it. And then the next morning, I got up at 6. I had to get up at 6 a.m. and go to work. So I waited for her to leave for work, and then I just like dashed out of the house for us not to come face to face. And then that night, I came back home, and she didn't mention it, and so I was like, okay, I'm not going to
Oh.
mention it either. And then the next day, I called, from work, I called her. I was like, yeah, so I'm gonna go and actually, follow this issue up and see like what I have to do to
Mm.
go. And since then, like every day, when I would say hi, she would cry. When I said goodbye, she would just like she
Wow.
was in tears. And it was very difficult for her. And so that was one. And the second was leaving my brother behind because
Yeah.
my brother, you can imagine, like he was 3 when he lost his dad. He was almost 6 when he was separated from his mom. And the only constant in his life was me. And I was like the sister, the mother, the father, everything to him.
Yes.
And so for me, it was really, really difficult to leave him behind and to have him understand like why it is that I'm doing this. He was 14 at that time, and I remember the last night, the night before I left, he said, you know, you were the only person who was always there, and now you're leaving too. And I
Wow.
just cried that night till
Mhm.
dawn because I was like, how am I doing this to him? But
Mhm.
I knew like I was like, he's going to understand at some point in time like why
Mhm.
I'm making this decision. And
Yeah.
that was really important for me. Um
Wow. That is quite powerful. That really is. And to know that your mom also took part in this and said, this is what I'm going to do. And let's fast forward because your experiences can definitely be a movie and everything else with things happening. But let's fast forward now to present day. Actually, just briefly, when you left the United States to join the resistance, where did you go first? And then let's take it to the present day. So, when you left, did you meet up with your
at that time I
mom
came to
again?
France. No,
Okay.
I came to France first, and then
Okay.
later on, I did see my mom. And at that time, my mom didn't know, like she was. And when I
Oh,
remember the first time I saw my mom, I was like, "Why didn't you ever tell me to join the resistance?" She was like, "That was not my place
hmm
to do so. That was a decision that you had to make yourself, and
hmm
I didn't expect you to make it. I
yeah.
mean,
hmm
you know, and because growing up, we grew up with this, you know, I guess this call or like our generation, we grew up with this from
hmm
our parents that look, your generation needs to concentrate on your studies
Uh-huh.
because you guys are the ones who are going to rebuild Iran. So everyone thought that this regime would be overthrown a lot. I mean, no one thought it would last for 47 years.
Wow.
Everyone thought, like, I remember back then, like, my dad would be like, in 6 months, we're going to be in Iran. So when I would say like 1 year, he'd be like, no, 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 6 months. In 6 months, we're in Iran. So we grew up with that. Like I grew up with this, you know, thought that the regime is going to be over. I never thought that I would be, you know, in my
Mhm.
45 and still
Yeah.
the regime is not overthrown. I never thought that that would be possible. So everyone always thought that the regime would be overthrown by our parents' generation and it would be our responsibility to rebuild Iran. And
Mm.
and so that's why like the concentration on our studies and to become something that, you know, be able to give back to the
Mm.
community and give back to society.
Exactly.
So that was also like what I mean, our parents wanted for us too. They wanted
hmm
us, they wanted to see us strive and they wanted us to see us, you know, be able to play that role. So I think that when I joined the resistance, it was a shock to my mom too because she didn't expect that. And especially I think that I was only 9, almost 10 when I was separated from my
hmm
mom. So I think that just imagine when you haven't seen a child that you haven't seen since they were 10 and then 8 years later, you still think of them as that 10-year-old. So you're not thinking
Exactly.
of them as like this adult now,
Yeah.
who has come to this crossroad and is making these decisions in their lives now. So I think that, yeah, I think the first time that she heard that I had decided to join the resistance, it was a surprise to her as much as it
Uh-huh.
was to everyone else.
Exactly.
But yeah.
Now, let us go into where we are now in 2026. But first, for anyone that may not fully know or understand, we hear the word resistance. We know that currently, as we are recording this episode, there's an active war in Iran with the US, etc. And there are a lot of people, I've heard chatter, I've seen it in comments online where people are saying, okay, President Trump overthrew the dictator. Let's bring our troops home. Let's come back. There is this misconception, Zolal, that, okay, the main person was overthrown, died, etc., well, killed, and this should not be taking this long. But you and I talked offline, and you clarified and cleared up so much for me that I didn't even really understand. So when you say that you're in the resistance, what does that look like in terms of, especially with you living in France, with things happening in Iran? What part are you actively participating in with it? What does that look like? And how do you clear up this misconception that, oh, all it takes is overthrowing one person and then everything should be well? Because sadly, that's what several people think. Clear all of that up for us.
Okay. Well, just to explain, when I say the resistance, what that means, the resistance is the National Council of Resistance of Iran, which I am a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee. It serves as an umbrella group of it's like a coalition, and it has over 500 members, 25 committees. It's kind of like the government in exile
Hmm.
for after the overthrow of the regime in its entirety. Um, One of the main member of the NCRI, like the largest organization, which is a member of the NCRI. There are 5 different organizations who are members, but the largest one is the PMOI, or known as the MEK in the US. So they are the main opposition movement in Iran, and they have been fighting for 60 years against both the current regime and the previous regime of the Shah. The NCRI was formed in 1981 as a government in exile, and it has been working for 45 years, coming July 20th. So that's like the backstory of understanding like the terms.
Mhm.
Um, the PMOI, or the MEK, they have a network inside of Iran, which it's like they call it the resistance units. So the MEK resistance units is a strategy that they've been working on for 12 years, having network underground, which pushes forward with different activity, raising awareness on one hand and keeping the flame of resistance and hope alive in society. Another is like targeting centers of oppression and whatnot, and organized resistance and mobilizing on the ground. So
Mhm.
that is their responsibility. Um, what you just addressed, I think it's really important to understand, because this is something that we have been saying not just today, but like for 22 years now,
Mhm.
that the solution to Iran is neither war nor appeasement. There is a third option, and that's supporting the people of Iran and their organized resistance to bring about change. This is something that Mrs. Rajabi has outlined in the European Parliament 22 years ago, and we call it the third option. Um, the reason is it's not only a matter of principle, which we believe that neither one is a solution, and the solution is the people of Iran, but even when you look at it like logically from a military perspective, even first of all, the policy of appeasement in history, we have seen that appeasement eventually leads to war, because when
Mhm.
you're negotiating with a dictator, they're not a democratic government. They're going to use every possibility that they can, and then you're going to reach a point that there's a point of no return, and that is what we see with the Iranian regime, because unfortunately it is the number one sponsor of international terrorism on one hand, and it is a rich country in natural resources. So there were those who were you know negotiating with the regime because of economic benefits, and then there were those who were negotiating with the regime because they feared the regime. It's hostage diplomacy, it's meddling in the region, it's terrorism and whatnot. So eventually we've reached a point that now there's a war who has been used as a bargaining chip at all of these negotiation tables? The Iranian resistance and the people of Iran, unfortunately. But why isn't war the solution? Because Iran is not Iraq or Afghanistan or Syria or Libya or any of those other countries in the
Mhm.
region, even though those weren't even very successful either. But Iran is like 3 times the size of Iraq, with 4 times the population. We have every possible terrain in Iran. So we have desert, we have mountain ranges, we have jungles, we have, sea and water. And we have like huge metropolitan cities.
Mhm.
So what are you going to do? Are you going to go in with troops on the ground? How are you going to be able to do that? From which border are you going to do that? Tehran is like, pretty far from any of the closest borders for you to be able to reach there. You would have to go through like different terrains to be able to reach Tehran, which is the, capital.
Capital. Yeah.
On the other hand, a scenario like Venezuela, where you have that top figure removed and then the whole system collapses, is is not possible with Iran because it's not a classical dictatorship. Like for instance, the Shah was a classical dictatorship. When he fled Iran 2 weeks later, the whole regime was, had collapsed.
Mhm.
Um, with the mullahs, though, because it's supposed to be a republic, they have like a whole apparatus intact. They have you know, their different, their different branches of the government. They
Uh-huh.
have a supreme leader. The supreme leader is not hereditary, so that's why, like for instance, when you remove Khomeini, the next person replaces him. The same way that when Khomeini died in 1989, he was replaced with Khamenei at that time. So the system still is intact, and that's what everyone was like. Hold up, didn't we just kill like their top
Uh-huh.
figures? Then why is this regime still able to? Not only are they able to defend themselves, they are on the offensive and they're attacking 12 other countries in the region right now. And they didn't understand or comprehend that. But this is a regime that has, for 47 years, it has uh, been able to stand on 2 feet. One has been internal suppression, and the other has been export of terrorism and warmongering. So it strives on war. It strives on, these type of situations because at the end of the day, they don't care about the people of Iran. So they could care less if people are being killed. But right now, you have given them the opportunity to play both the victim card and the hero card for some. So for some, they're like the victim of, you know, um, interference in their country by the West and whatnot. And for some, they're the ones who are standing to world powers or whatever. So that is how they're trying to gain support from outside of Iran. And then internally, also, I don't think no one would like to see their country bombed.
Mhm.
So with that pretext, the regime is able to, for a small percentage, not very vast, but for a small percentage, they are able to like rally around the flag in a way.
Mhm.
But also they're able to create complete suppression in society. So right now there's martial law intact in Iran, even though we are, over a month into the ceasefire, but still there's complete martial law in Iran. And then on the other hand, we are seeing checkpoints that have been set up throughout the country. Like they say, if you want to travel like a 30-minute distance, you will be stopped at least twice by different checkpoints. And then the checkpoints, they're not just checking your car or your ID, they are checking everything. Are they take your phone, they check your phone, they check to see when is the last time that you've connected to certain apps, which would show that if you have somehow circumvented the um,
Mhm.
internet blackout, because right now it's day 75 of the internet blackout as we're recording right now. So people don't have access to the world. So the regime is even checking if you don't have your phone with you, they say, oh, that's a red flag. what are you
Oh,
trying to hide? You're probably hiding something, and that's why you don't have your phone with you. So, I mean, even one of the, unfortunately, in the past 50 days, we have, since the ceasefire, actually, we have seen a new wave of executions being carried out in Iran.
wow.
Um, there have been, some of them are protesters arrested just in January, or even people arrested even in February of this year. And, within 40 days of their arrest, they've been executed now. Um, and
Mm,
some of them are teens, like 18, 19 years old. Some of them are in their early 20s. Mostly are, Gen Zs. Um, and then we see people who, like 8 people who've been executed for affiliation with the MEK. Um, and so the regime, in fact, is actually telling the world like what they fear the most. They fear the people of Iran and the organized resistance because that is the threat to their existence, right? But on the other hand, they feel like they have open hands right now for these executions because even though like last year 2 political prisoners were executed in July, there was international condemnation from practically every government
mm,
making a statement on it. This time, as I said, it's been 20 something political prisoners have been executed, and it's like one execution every day, practically. That's how the regime is doing it to spread fear in society. Um, and there has been not a single government has taken a position to condemn these executions. That serves as a green light to the regime. Why is there this silence? Because everyone's like, oh, right now the negotiations are going on. We don't want to do anything to affect that. While in reality, stopping execution should be one of the issues being raised in the negotiations. It should be you know, um, one of the points that they need to agree to end the war. But unfortunately, human rights in Iran has no place at the negotiation table right now, and that is something that's very concerning. So that is what's happening on the ground inside of
mhm,
Iran right now.
mhm.
Um, and yeah, so this is, I think, something that we could discuss, I guess, a bit more later. But
Exactly. Yeah.
from what happened from
Yeah.
the protests and where
Very
we are today.
informative.
So at
Uh-huh.
the end of the day, this regime is not going to fall with bombs over the head. It's the only way this regime is going to fall in its entirety, and there will be regime change actually and overthrow of this system would be through, you know, it being overthrown by the people of Iran in its
Hmm.
entirety. So it'll be probably like a combination of nationwide uprisings and protests and
Wow.
armed struggle and resistance on the ground.
Wow. That is so informative, and it sheds a very clear light on that. And it makes sense, especially when you explained how it's not your traditional dictatorial government. It's literally almost and I don't say this to be positive, but it's literally like a well-oiled machine with the systems in place and how things are run. And that's something that the average American honestly does not know. Just based off of me speaking with people who stay abreast to the news, to what's going on, who read global papers, that part was not clear. And oh my goodness, we are pressed for time, but I could talk to you forever. But the whole point here is it then begs the question, Zolal, is that if you all in the resistance know that it's so complex and it's not necessarily an easy fix, and my mic wants to give me trouble. I'm sorry. Okay, there we go. And it's not necessarily an easy fix, then the question becomes what comes next? How is this all really worth it with the work that you're doing, knowing that this is such a complex issue? And as you stated, for it to have been going on for nearly 50 years now, is it truly worth the risk? And what comes next for your work?
Well, I think you asked a very important question. I think that uh, what does give us the ambition to continue is, first of all, the fact that we know that this is inevitable, that this
Mm,
regime is going to fall.
mm,
Yes, it comes with a grave price. 120,000 people have been executed just for supporting the Iranian resistance, specifically
wow.
the MEK. And that's from, from the early days of after this revolution till today, with the last, as I mentioned, the 8 people who were members of this resistance who've been executed, from Vahid Bani Amelian to Puya Gobadi and Muhammad Taghawi, and all of them. And they have now turned into a source of inspiration for the younger generation of Iran. Um, and this continuation is very key. I think that is what guarantees that we could rest assured about what comes next, because people who have dedicated, 4 or 5 decades of their lives to the fight for freedom, you can be rest assured that they're not after power or gaining name recognition, or like, they're not doing this to line their own pockets, right?
Mhm.
Because they have sacrificed everything in their own lives for the freedom of the people of Iran. So that's the guarantee that we actually have, and that they've withstood the test of time. I think that's very key, and that's very important. When it comes to this resistance. Like, for instance, Mrs. Rajavi, who is the president-elect of the National Council of Resistance of Iran, for the interim government after the overthrow of the regime. She joined this resistance when she was 19. She is in her early 70s now. And she has the responsibility of the overthrow of the regime has been on her shoulder specifically for the last 40 years. And that kind of dedication is not something that you find every day.
Mm.
She has set forth a 10-point plan, which is based on, it's actually like the cliff notes of the plan for the interim government of the NCRI. And when you look at that 10-point plan, it has garnered the support of over 4,000 lawmakers around the world, over 130 former heads of state,
Oh.
over 100 Nobel laureates. Many have called it Jeffersonian because of like
Mm.
the points, each one, it creates like this, I guess, guide rail to make sure that we don't go, this is not taken out of direction or context, that
Mhm.
we're able to actually form a secular democratic republic. And why do we emphasize on secular democratic republic? Because secular meaning not a theocracy,
Yes.
democratic meaning not a dictatorship in any forms, republic not being a monarchy. So it
Mhm.
really does give you that direction. It calls for separation of religion and state. It calls for gender equality, which is a major point in our resistance. Just a fun fact that the MEK, for instance, since 1989, all of their secretary generals have been women, and the
Oh.
entire leadership council of the MEK are women. Mrs. Rajavi is the president-elect of the NCRI, but 52% of the National Council of Resistance of Iran are women. So
Oh,
women play a
interesting.
key role in our movement, because we
Mhm.
see that as the antithesis to the misogynist regime ruling Iran. We call for the autonomy of Iran's ethnicities. We call for a independent judiciary. She calls for the abolition of the death penalty, which is very key in Iran, because both the Shah and the mullahs, unfortunately, were the record holders in their times of executions.
Wow.
Um, just in 2025, 2,200 people were executed in Iran, and the amnesty reports still exist from the 1970s that said at that time Iran was the #1 perpetrator of executions back then. So the mullahs or the Shah, I mean, it didn't really make a difference. They were dictators, and dictators have to rule through execution and torture and whatnot. So all of that is eliminated based on the 10-point plan.
Mhm.
And we call for a non-nuclear Iran. And I think that's something that, well, the world would never have known about Iran's nuclear program if it wasn't because of the NCRI, who revealed the nuclear program back in 2002. Also, like, for instance, the fact that even though we're Muslims and believe in the secular government, um, I think it's really interesting that back in like I think it was 1996 or so, um, the head of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the NCRI, Mr. Muhaddisi, he wrote a book. It's called Islamic Fundamentalism: The New Global Threat.
Mm.
No one took it seriously back then. And then once 9/11 happened, everyone was like, how did you know that? And he was like, yeah, because we understand the what this regime is and what it does and what it stands for. So that's what we understood, that this is the new global threat, but no one listened. But we had the answers back then. And I think it's really interesting for me, even, it's very interesting that today, everything that we have said has been proven, that it's not just words. Like we said, the solution to Iran is not a war or appeasement, it's supporting the people of Iran. Now the world is seeing that. We
Mhm.
said, we need to move forward. We're not stuck between bad and worse, like the current regime or the previous dictatorship. We want to move forward to a democracy.
Mhm.
And people are now seeing that in the messages coming from inside of Iran. So I think that the test of time has been, very important. But I think that right now we have reached a very critical time. And but the regime has reached the point of no return. So we will be seeing change in Iran very soon, I think.
That is quite incredible, especially knowing that you really started to get your interest and your intrigue at the age of 4 years young of really understanding. So for the past 41 years, particularly, I mean, granted, technically at 3 weeks old, as you said, you were at your first one. So for your entire life, you have seen this gradual evolution and growth happening. And although it may not have been as quickly as people may have desired, it's happening and it's gradual. And the work that you're doing is putting everything into perspective. If people want to learn more about you and your work, or even somebody that may say, wow, I would love to get her on a platform or to just understand more and how I can participate, how can they contact you?
Well, to learn more about the movement, you could visit ncr-iran.org or mayam-rajavi.com or mayamrajaviforchange.com. If you would like to become more active with like the diaspora in the US, there's OIAC, so it's oiac.org. They actually have a demonstration, a rally. I'm not sure if this is going to be aired in time, but on the 16th,
Your
on this Saturday.
Oh yeah, your episode will release this month, but not by the 16th.
Yeah.
No.
So, but yeah, so you can reach out to them. They have chapters in over 40 states, so you're probably covered
Mhm.
there. And for those who are in any other place in the world, they could reach out to
Global.
iranfreedom.org. The Iranian diaspora is organizing a huge rally on the 20th of June, June
Oh,
20th, in Paris, actually. We're expecting about 100,000 people to be in attendance. So if you are in Europe or if you're visiting in Paris, stop by and show your solidarity. It'll be in Paris at 2 p.m. On the 20th in June. And if you would like to reach out to me, I am, on social media in Instagram and X, LinkedIn. You could, send me a message and I'll be more than happy to respond back.
wow. And as a closing question, I didn't know which direction I wanted to go with this, but I'll go with this one. Knowing just from your heritage of your parents, that activist spirit and just wanting to do right by humanity has always been inside of you. And it probably was even in prior generations that you may or may not have known about. But my question for you is, although I asked what's next, what keeps you going and moving forward in doing this movement when you, as a 45-year-old intelligent woman with so much going for her in life, could really do anything else that life brought you, but you chose to do this? What is your why?
Well, I think that the more that I have been in this resistance, the more I understand the depth of it and what it actually means to be a part of this. I mean, when you look in history or in evolution, I mean, at the end of the day, life on this earth is limited. So what greater, achievement could I possibly have in my life than to be able to give freedom to a nation, and prevent other generations from going through what we did. I don't want to see another child have to go through the death of their father or mother who was executed and killed. I remember there was this little girl who knew that her father was on death row, and she had actually drawn the scene of the execution because she dreaded this moment so much. And she was only 7, and I don't want another 7-year-old to have to make that drawing. And then unfortunately, her father was executed, and she was standing right outside of the prison wall that morning at 5 a.m. when they carried out the execution. I don't want another generation to have to live with those realities. So I think that the more and more that we move forward, the more I personally gain every single day from this path, because I think this is the path of emancipation for both women and men. The resilience of continuing this fight and sacrificing everything, and understanding that, look, you have to fight egoism. You have to fight all of those gender biases to be able to push this forward, because you're fighting against a misogynist regime. And if you look in history, usually when you are up against a theocracy, theocracies last about 300 to 500 years. With the resistance that we have had, we have now made it to this point that after 47 years, everyone is like, this regime is on the brink of falling apart. So this isn't yes, it is long, but if you look at it in the greater picture, it's not that long, really. And so I think that I could have, I think that that's the greatest accomplishment I could have in life. I think I'm a part of a very lucky generation to have had this opportunity to be able to be a part of something so much bigger than myself. And to be able to create that impact that will continue so much longer than our lives. So I think that's my daily inspiration, to be able to stop, first of all, even if we can stop even one execution one day earlier, that is worth it. If we could, safeguard one more life, it's worth it to me. And I hope that soon we will see that free Iran, and we will see it flourish and its effect. I think it'll have a ripple effect on not only in the region, but throughout the world. And hopefully that day will be near.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Power Transformation Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to follow or subscribe, leave a 5-star rating, and write a review. It helps us inspire even more listeners. And don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who could use a little power in their transformation. Until next time, keep bouncing back, keep rising, and be good to yourself and to others.